Stan Jabalisco here, proprietor and operator of amateur radio station W1GV, Whiskey 1, Good Vibrations. I have a little lightning story for you. Lightning kills more people than hurricanes or tornadoes. Believe it or not, in light of the recent episode with Dorian and the Bahamas, overall, lightning kills more people than hurricanes or tornadoes. Floods, I believe, are the most deadly of all. Wildfires, well, we have them here in Dakota Territory, but we haven't had any since I've lived here that have threatened this house yet. But I do recall about a half a century ago when I lived in Rochester, Minnesota, as amateur radio operator Whiskey Alpha Zero Oscar Kilo Victor WA0OKV. I had a Drake R4A and T4X combination, an ICO, EICO, electronic keyer. I don't know, yes, I had a Viking Matchbox too, Transmatch, which went to coaxial line leading out to some kind of an antenna, probably the vertical on the roof that I had cut for 20 meters. Although it might have been, it was not an open wire line, I don't think. But anyway, it doesn't really matter what the antenna was. It received a pretty good sized electrostatic impulse from a nearby lightning strike. Fortunately, I was not on the air. I had spent my morning 11 to 12 o'clock a.m. workout at Soldiers Field Pool. Unheated pool in the summer in Minnesota can still be pretty cold. I was working out with the Rochester Swim Club, probably in high school, and our workout was interrupted by a heavy electrical storm. I remember waiting for my mother to come pick me up and cringing each time lightning struck. There was a football field just north of the pool, and I remember lightning striking the goal post at the opposite end of that field, probably about 400 meters away from where I stood. Just a very intense electrical storm, and it went on and on for most of the afternoon. It was probably in June, the stormiest month electrically in Minnesota generally. And finally we got home and we were sitting in the master bedroom where my mother and father slept. And I recall she was sitting at her desk and I was sitting on their bed. We were talking about something or other. And all of a sudden, as the storm raged outside and the thunder boomed, there was a snap and a crackle from the lamp on the desk, and a little puff of smoke went up from that lamp. And the power stayed on, oddly enough. And we both looked at each other like, this is a big storm, something like that. Well, later on that day, the storm ended, and I remember going back down to the ham radio shack in our fallout shelter, which I affectionately called the lab. Couldn't turn on the lights. There was a special fuse devoted just entirely to the lab, probably a 15 or 25 amp fuse, in a little fuse box about the size of the same size as the box that you'd use for an ordinary electrical outlet, had a little screw-in fuse. Well, that fuse had not only blown, but the whole fuse box had exploded and blown its contents, its debris, all over the lab, despite the meandering hallway that led into that fallout shelter, as all good fallout shelters had. Fallout, Stanley, that's how you say it. We were still afraid of radioactive fallout in the Cold War with the Soviet Union, which at that time seemed a very real threat to life on Earth. We might blow each other to smithereens in an instant. Some computer mistake or human error, somebody pressed the wrong button. Well, we were afraid of that sort of thing, and so a lot of people built fallout shelters, and then it became apparent that the danger was not quite so great, and our fallout shelter turned into my lab, and the fuse box exploded with such violence that it scattered its debris all over the lab. And when I finally got the lights back on, replaced that fuse box, and the lights came on normally, I didn't see any damage to my station. There was no evidence of any damage to my station, except for 3 things. Number 1, the fuse in the ICO keyer had blown. It was just a little fuse to protect that small device from just exactly the kind of thing that had occurred, or a short circuit in the power supply, something like that. To protect it from being damaged. You know what fuses are for. It had blown. Replaced it, the keyer worked fine. In the matchbox, the transmatch, there were connectors with feed-through insulators. One of the feed-through insulators had a very significant black mark on it where lightning had jumped from the center conductor of the coaxial cable to the chassis of the transmatch. Just about an inch, 2.5, 3 centimeters, had jumped the gap and made its way to its ultimate goal, which was ground, of course. Well, one other thing had happened, and I didn't notice that until I tried the radio antenna and it didn't work very well. The RG8U coaxial cable had a polyethylene dielectric. It had a solid polyethylene dielectric, which had been charred black all the way from one end to the other. It was no longer a dielectric. It was some kind of a charred black semiconducting material, useless. The whole cable had to be replaced. But other than that, my station suffered no damage that I ever discovered. Thank God for that fuse box, eh? If that fuse had not been there, that radio may have had serious damage to some of its interior power supply components. But in any case, it was an easy fix. I'm just very, very glad that I was not on the air at the time of that event, the lightning strike or nearby lightning strike. It would have scared me half to death. Probably would not have hurt me caused any injury other than to my memory, in which case, of course, the story would be far more dramatic and would have cost a lot more money to formulate. But I guess there is no lesson to be learned here other than that lightning is dangerous and unpredictable, capricious, and maybe in some ways even has a sense of humor. But you don't want to be the object of its laughter and derision. Trust me on this one. An old-timer speaketh. Stan Gibilisco, W1GV, signing off, saying 73 and so long, which, in my native fist, even during a thunderstorm were I so foolish to be operating, would translate to da-da-da-da-da-da.